This is the United States Energy Association Power Sector Podcast. I'm Herman K. Trabish. I've covered the power sector since 2006, and I currently report for Utility Dive. In this episode of the USEA Podcast series on the future of energy policy, we're going to talk about what to expect in the power sector under the new presidential administration and Congress as changing resources, spiking electricity demand, and extreme weather events add unprecedented stress to the U.S. power system. Ray Long, President and CEO of the American Council on Renewable Energy, or ACORE, is going to discuss what could happen to existing and new incentives and policies and the clean energy resources they support. Before taking over the ACORE leadership in November 2023, Ray spent over 5 years as a senior vice president with Clearway Energy Group, the fifth largest U.S. clean energy developer, and 15 and a half years as vice president for government policy with NRG Energy, Fortune 500 utility scale and distributed energy developer and provider. Ray, with that world of experience, we're now looking at controversies uh, over the administration's actions on impounding funds, reviewing rules, and we'll get to all that in a minute. But first, assuming we get past those debates, which may be a bold assumption, I don't know. Do you think the IRA tax credits and other policies for utility scale and distributed resources will be subject to significant change, like reduction of compensation, acceleration of the phase out, a change in the requirements for domestic content? Or do you think the new leaders will recognize the importance of the IRA benefits all their states?
Well, Herman, thanks for that. First, thanks for having me on the podcast. It's really nice to be here after having listened to so many of the things that you've done over the last year and a half or so. Um, and great first question. I mean, there's so much going on right now having to do with the energy space, on policy, what's happening on the ground, and all that. So let me just start here and frame the issue for discussion, and then we'll get into the policy part and what policymakers might do. So we're at this interesting point in United States history where for the last couple of decades, demand for electricity has been fairly flat. So, we haven't really needed a ton of new power plants to be built and everything. But then all of a sudden, over the last couple of years, demand has started to go up. And the forecast as we get into 2030 and beyond looks like we're going to need a lot more power. So
Mhm.
what does a lot more power look like? And everybody likes a good analogy, right? So in my industry, we've got a lot of wonky people who like to talk about gigawatts and all those things. I'm going to simplify it and say this.
Good.
The recent demand forecast that came out in December by Grid Strategies showed that by 2030, we need the equivalent of 12 more New York cities worth of power on the grid. Now that's a lot. But what's driving that? What's the reason for that? So it's a few things. So everybody likes to talk about cloud growth, AI growth. Of course, that those all those play into data centers. But there's industrial and manufacturing electrification. There's home electrification. So a lot of people are buying heat pumps for their home. That's all electricity driven. There's electric vehicle charging, which is part of it. And then a whole host of other things. But suffice it to say, this is all part of our economy. And so
Mhm.
being able to achieve that demand challenge has the promise of doing things like driving the economy, creating jobs, creating opportunities for people, more property taxes and other things which help to, help communities and so forth to grow. It's a wonderful opportunity out there. So that's kind of the starting point. Demand's growing, and we've got a real opportunity to meet that demand going forward. Now, you asked about policy and how policy has enabled some of the investment that's taking place now, and that some of that policy was driven predominantly by Democrats in the last administration. So, how will the new administration react to that? As you would imagine, there's a lot of discussion about it. Were the right policies put in place? Is it having the desired impact? Are consumers at the end of the day getting what they really want out of power, which first and foremost is lower prices, right? And the answer to that is most of the stuff, it's over 80% of the investment that's being made in projects, new manufacturing, et cetera, is happening in rural and red communities. So
Mm.
we believe that, a lot of the congressmen, when they go home, they're seeing a lot of this stuff that's taking place in their district, the investments, the jobs, the property taxes, etc. I've got a great analogy for you on
Good.
this. I went in Texas. I went to a ribbon cutting for get this, a solar panel manufacturing facility, advanced manufacturing. And all advanced manufacturing means is for every human that they hire, there's two robots or more. So this great facility, they had hired 800 people at the time on their way to hiring 1,500 people. And the mayor of the town got up there and he said to everybody, this really matters and it's changing people's lives. Let me tell you why. I'm getting calls now from the 800 people, my constituents who work here, and here's what they've said. I'm now getting paid a real wage. This wage is enabling us to finally buy the homes that we wanted and to achieve the American dream. And we can actually think about putting our kids to school. And then he can't went in for the closer. And the closer was the median income in my community before this factory came was $20,000 a year, which is not a lot of money for an individual, let alone a family in the United
Even in
States.
Texas.
And it doubled. It more than doubled. It was over
Whoa.
$40,000. And they hadn't even hired all the people that they were going to yet. So that's the kind of thing that's happening on the ground in where these investments are taking place. And it's projects, it's manufacturing, and it's a host of other things. I believe that at the end of that, while the legislators now and the Trump administration are having very thoughtful dialogues about what the right mix is going forward, that as they get further into looking at what the new policy constructs are going to be, these are things that you have to consider. And it's really making an impact. And if you look out just over the next couple of years, there's a lot of things that are expected to be online and more investment made, et cetera, as long as the trend continues in that direction. Back to you.
Yeah, that's the thing about these benefits. They came out of the last administration, but even those Congress people in Texas, if they vote against them, they're going to have to go back to those Texas districts and explain why they cut off that opportunity for those jobs, right?
No, you're absolutely right. You have to answer for the decisions you make as a policymaker. So, policymakers are there for a reason, and it's a very important reason. They represent the constituents that are in their districts. And at the end of the day, they're the best bellwether for what they're seeing and hearing from their constituents, and they're going to vote along those lines. So the hope is that they see all this and that they can make those decisions. I believe that as the process starts to play out in earnest, and the House is looking at a reconciliation bill, and the Senate's doing similar considerations, that these things are taking an impact. So as they go to pull it together, whatever the shape of that new energy package is going to be, that it takes into account the aspects of the tax credits that were put in place before that are really working, like the advanced manufacturing tax credit. That's the one we were just talking about.
Let me ask you about one other aspect of the tax credits. There was a flurry of development activity in the last couple months of last year, and assuming the rules reviews and the impediments to fund are resolved, will the construction that was started on those many projects protect them through the rule of allowing them a significant amount of time to be built? And will it protect their tax credits during the next 4 years? Or another way to look at it, will the need to meet load growth at low prices, which is what those many of those projects offer, protect investment in them, uh, even if their incentives do change?
Let me say it this way. So I mentioned the demand challenge before, and it's huge, the opportunity to develop, right? We've got a policy construct that's in place now that's enabling the investment that we talked about that people want to see. And those investments are helping to drive costs down for consumers. When I listened to President Trump when he was running for election, I heard things like, and the country heard it, right? He was very transparent, open, and honest about what his perception was about energy challenges and then how to meet those. And we heard things like all of the above energy strategy. I think when I look at the playing field, that's the right solution. We want to build everything. We want to build, get stuff done, put people to work, meet these challenges, and then in the words of some of my Republican friends, when they talk about it, really achieve United States energy dominance, which means a whole bunch of things, but it's reliability, it's energy security, it's meeting that demand challenge so that in a worldwide setting in competition for AI evolution, that we're able to dominate there at the end of the day. That's the
Yeah.
right solution. When I think about deployment, right? So let's pick on that. When I think about deployment of the different technologies, we're looking at all of the above. So it's renewables, it's wind, solar storage, it's all the other stuff that's out there. It's hydro, geothermal, it's nuclear, both new and existing nuclear, it's natural gas. That kind of covers the landscape now of the conventional things that are getting built. We need to do that and not leave anything behind. A sum of the above approach is going to put us at a competitive disadvantage. Now, when you think about a time frame for deployment and you look at things like supply chains, when can I get equipment to get things done? What's in the permitting process now and what it's going to come out? Here's what that looks like. Between now and 2030, the low-hanging fruit is wind, solar, and storage. And here's why. 97% of everything that's in the permitting process right now fall into those three buckets: wind, solar, and storage. So equipment's been procured, permits are underway, interconnection process is underway, all that stuff. If you start today and you look at new natural gas generation, if you look at nuclear, those all start to come online in 2030 and then out from there. So we're going to have natural gas. We're going to have nuclear, both extensions of existing nuclear as well as SMR development. But those are going to take a little while to get through permitting and get through procurement, and so that the equipment itself can be manufactured and delivered. That's why I think this is an all of the above approach, and this is why we're only 3 weeks into the new administration's term, as they look at things like paying out of the different portals for the different things that are going on, and all that. We need to get through all that so that they understand everything that's happening, the value that's being conferred to ratepayers, the infrastructure that's being developed, and we'll eventually get there. It's just going to take some
Yeah, yeah.
time.
Let me dig into that, the subject matter that you were talking about just now. There have been a bunch of initiatives from the new administration to review or rescind leases and approvals and funding, and review the rules that came out of the IRA, um, for utility scale renewables, especially onshore and offshore wind. Can you talk a little bit about what's been done or what's being done and how they could, or they seemed like they could limit the growth of clean energy, and then if they do that, limit the U.S.'s ability to meet anticipated load growth over the next 5 years?
Sure. So, Herman, just a little background on me. I've been doing this for a long time. I've been working in the energy industry for about 30 years. When I started, I was developing uh, gas plants. I was putting emissions controls on coal plants. I did coal to gas conversions. I've worked on nuclear, and then I worked for a variety of other things. I did clean coal technology and integrated gasification combined cycle plant. I worked on the Petronova project in Texas, which took carbon out of the flue stream of a coal plant, captured it, and then put it in an oil
Put in
well to
oil
get more
wells.
oil out of
Yeah.
it. Yeah, and then concentrated solar. I've done all of these things in my time here. I am not somebody that will come here and sit there and talk about, just renewables or just gas. So that's the context when I answer your question and I say this truly needs to be an all of the above strategy. So when the Biden folks were in office and we were sitting there talking about it, I would talk openly about the role of natural gas and the virtue and the benefits that that would bring in terms of price, reliability, environmental attributes, energy security, and all those. Just like I talked about the same thing for the renewable side. So that was my approach to Biden and pushing back there. And my approach to the current administration is the same. It's, we talked about an all of the above strategy. We know what the demand challenge is and opportunity going forward. We really shouldn't be leaving anything on the table, and unless there's a real reason for it. And just not liking wind or offshore wind, it leaves a resource on the table that we could use right now to our advantage.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, you mentioned natural gas. It's possible, we've talked to people on the podcast, and apparently you have experience with it, that over the next 5 years, when we fill in this 5 year period with what's available now, the low hanging fruit, wind, solar, batteries, we may be able to develop. I think it's likely that we'll be able to better develop carbon capture to go with that natural gas, and advanced geothermal, enhanced geothermal as it's known, to supplement and provide the base load that so many people these days are talking about, right?
I love that you brought in these other technologies. Geothermal, I think, is one of the untapped resources that we've got in the United States. And you mentioned advanced geothermal, right? With fascinating technology where you drill down, horizontal drill, and you can get essentially base loaded power from a geothermal system. Again, the fuel is free, like so many other, renewable technologies, and you get baseload power out of it. One of my friends works over at the Hydro Association, and he likes to talk openly about the fact that, if you look at all the dams in the United States right now, that only about 3% of them produce electricity, but that about 25% of them could be retrofitted to produce electricity. So I'd like to think that, that hydro is another piece of that. And then, you're spot on with respect to all these technologies. There is a huge opportunity for utilizing those going forward as well.
Okay, Ray, one last question. We're running low on time, but just whatever you can do to handle this. Um, Permitting and regulatory impediments, there's been some papers that show that most of those impediments come from local and not federal issues, but um, wherever they're coming from, they have slowed deployment of generation and transmission. Now, the Manchin-Barrasso bill was supposed to streamline permitting, but it failed last year. So the basic question, and again, as quickly as you can in our limited time, will there again be FERC or congressional action on permitting and regulatory reform? Because it's it's needed to enable greater system reliability. And if there is going to be that, how do you see it being presented? Will we get a Manchin-Barrasso bill again or something like it? I know Senator Manchin's not around anymore.
Well, the crystal ball about the shape that will take is a little murky. But suffice it to say, you look at the permitting and transmission bill that you mentioned, EPRA, that did fail at the end of the last session. It had a lot of support on both sides, and they just couldn't come to agreement on it before the end of the session. So my hope is, with bipartisan support for a number of the provisions that were in there, that'll ultimately get folded into whatever the package is that comes together around energy. And I know that permitting is difficult to do in a reconciliation bill, so maybe it comes out in a different form. And I'll just say this, we talked about the demand challenge. We talked about the fact that there's a lot of supply out there, and you're absolutely right, Herman. Connecting that supply to demand is incredible, and you highlighted the two things that are critical to that. More transmission build out, which will enable more of that energy dominance that we talked about before. And then the second thing is, we can't have any projects in the United States taking 10 plus years to get through the permitting process. We should aspire to have a thoughtful process with clear go, no go steps along the way, so that whether it's a generation project or a transmission project, that they've got all their permits or not within 5 years. And that's what we should be aspiring to.
Excellent. I think that's a place to leave it for today, Ray. Thank you so much. My guest has been American Council on Renewable Energy, or ACORE, President and CEO Ray Long, for his insights on what to expect in the power sector under the new presidential administration and Congress, as changing resources, spiking electricity demand, and extreme weather events add unprecedented stress to the U.S. power system and threaten our ability to keep our economy steaming along unless we go for all of the above. As always, I also want to thank our listeners for taking the time to check out the USEA Power Sector Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share with everybody you know our quest for energy transition solutions.